Some breaking news from the Federalist. The analysts who crafted the corrupt intelligence community assessment on Russia's meddling into the 2016 presidential election on behalf of disgraced former CIA Director John Brennan remain active at the CIA, and a House Intelligence Committee staff report established that the ICA was significantly worse and significantly more corrupt than conveyed in the memorandum released last week by CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Now, the report from the Federalist went on to assess that, quote, the analysts who actually drafted the ICA report for Brennan are still with the CIA. Some maybe even having been promoted after compiling the faulty report in violation of standard operating procedures. So just to make sure you understand what is going on here, there is now undeniable evidence that there was a real plot by the intelligence community to take down President Donald J. Trump during his first term. And the unelected bureaucrats who helped to undermine our Constitution, the people who constantly hector us about democratic norms, were all rewarded immensely for their efforts. It gets better. According to Miranda Devine at the New York Post, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe has not only begun investigating John Brennan and those analysts still at CIA who are loyal to Brennan for their role in the Russia collusion delusion, but he has also recommended criminal indictments for Brennan allegedly lying to Congress and for former FBI Director James Comey as well. So despite all the caterwauling about Trump's supposed cover-up of the Epstein files, the president continues delivering on at least some big promises he made throughout the campaign. He is pursuing justice for those who attempted to overthrow the constitutional government in 2016 and very well may have helped to overturn the will of the voters in 2020. We're now joined by J. Michael Waller. He's the author of the best-selling book, Big Intel, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. Mike, it's good to see you. This is very hopeful in the way of getting accountability. But you know me, I'm always a little bit hesitant because it can sound really good at first, like indictments are coming, which we heard from, 2018 to 2020, only to be let down. You're really read in on this kind of investigation. You understand these. How likely is it that we might actually see an arrest for Brennan, Comey, Clapper? Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. Mike.
Right. Well, I don't know how likely it is we'll actually see an arrest because these cases are very hard to build, especially when you're relying on the same careerists who were part of the problem as the ones in the system now to help you solve the problem. So I'm not going to hold my breath on actual arrests, let alone convictions, but I can say there is real ample evidence and just cause to launch these investigations and to pursue them through prosecutions, not only of Comey and Brennan, but a lot of the anonymous people inside. The hazard of the latter point is that the Justice Department might go after the lower hanging fruit, which it often tends to do, and bust some anonymous insider and let the big ones go free.
Trump himself didn't sound super confident that there would be true accountability, because when he was asked about it last week during that luncheon with African leaders, he was asked about this leaked, the news of the leaked news of the investigation into Comey, Brennan, and Clapper. He said, well, they should face consequences. And I'm summarizing here. He said they should face consequences, and maybe they will, perhaps they will, was the language he used.
Yeah, he did campaign on it. These were attacks that made him and his whole family and the whole nation miserable for years and years and years. So I do think he wants to do it. I think he might also be advised to be careful about what he says so that his own comments don't jeopardize a prosecution. So we can't always take things the president says at face value, not because he's lying, but because he wants to make sure that there are prosecutions with solid integrity behind them.
This was some good news after what many last week surmised as perhaps the worst week in the Trump presidency. That after we found out that the DOJ was not going to release Epstein files or that they've considered the case closed. Does this bring back the base's confidence in the administration?
I don't think so. This was another campaign promise. This was something that was a really, really big deal. This was something where the Attorney General came out with the big social media supporters of the president and gave a big nothing burger. And then all of a sudden we're being told, don't believe anything you've ever seen or heard because there's nothing there. Let's just move forward. It's too bothersome, too troublesome rather, too mysterious. And it doesn't allow certain things to be put to rest. I mean, was there this problem, an issue, or was there not? It raises a lot of counterintelligence problems. A lot of people say the Israelis were behind Epstein. I think it was more the Russians, because if you look at Epstein's partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was probably a Russian agent, a Soviet agent, as early as the 1950s in Britain. And a lot of these deep operations take place over generations. So it might be another deflection to protect Russian assets. The fact is, we simply don't know. Now, I will say, though, there's a key point in these prosecutions, and that is the Attorney General and the President are dependent on the director of the Office of Records Policy Management, the guy in charge of the policies for keeping and destroying records at the Justice Department. This is a Biden holdover. He was demoted voluntarily from the National Archives a year ago this month and brought over at a lower rank to the Justice Department to run this office. And according to the Justice Department website, he's still there. So if anyone was involved, you think of this, he was named right after Biden's huge flop in his debate with Trump. Right after Trump survived the assassination attempt, late July of last year, he's brought in to run records policy management at DOJ. That means what records can be destroyed, what records may be kept or must be kept, what should be put in the National Archives and even put into deep storage. And what should be made readily available. He's the one directing the policy for the Trump administration.
That's incredible and extremely disappointing. Is it Pam Bondi who needs to fire him? How does he go?
Yeah, she should just fire him. His name is Lawrence Brewer. He's director of the Office of Records Management Policy at the Department of Justice. And the link to his DOJ page is right up on my X page today.
Lawrence Brewer, that's a name we need to get out there, because honestly, I mean, let's just look at what happened last week with Bondi. You obviously aren't going to get action unless they face some kind of pressure, right? We've seen that they do respond, whether it's the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, and what she did related to cattle coming across the border and the threat of screwworm, or the immigration issue, right? Raiding farms, and you're obviously going to have to push the administration, some of these people, to do the right thing. And this is the case with this Lawrence Brewer with Pam Bondi. I mean, that is unbelievable given what we were promised and what Pam Bondi goes and says on TV almost on a daily basis, that she would leave that kind of person in place directing policy for the Trump administration. That brings us also to the FBI. And campaign promises. Kash Patel, Dan Bongino have been very vocal about the Epstein files as they were prominent figures in conservative media, saying that he is absolutely likely a intelligence asset. We played that soundbite from Tim Cass of Bongino on this show many times. We've heard similar sentiments from Kash Patel in the past. Now we're hearing that both of them could possibly leave the FBI. It seems that Bongino leaked this news on Friday, that he had taken the day off. He's considering resigning. And now we're hearing through, the rumor mill that perhaps Kash Patel will leave if Bongino leaves. And I had to pose the question, which is better, Bongino leaving or staying, Kash leaving or staying? How you worked at the FBI before. You weren't an agent, but you worked at the FBI. You followed the careers of these two figures who are now in leadership. What do you make of the potential for them to resign already in the wake of the Epstein files fallout?
Well, I didn't work with the FBI, but I helped the FBI a lot over the years. So I know it rather well and can see that the FBI really hasn't changed. The FBI runs the directors. The directors don't run the FBI. So this is something that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are working really hard to change. But you can see from the nature of the changes that the president really doesn't want to break the FBI apart into different pieces. The FBI, he appears to want a golden, shiny, powerful FBI as part of his legacy that he will then hand on to future generations, which I think is very unfortunate. If that is indeed the case, and we haven't seen the plans coming out yet from Kash Patel or Dan Bongino or the president for that matter, but it looks like we're going to be stuck with the FBI, which means we're going to be stuck with the bureaucracy that has been, a lot of it's been part of the problem. A lot of it is in the public interest, but a lot of it's problematic. And what these guys do, like as they do in any bureaucracy, is they brown nose their way up to the top, and then they kiss up to the new leadership, and they act indispensable, and sometimes are indeed helpful because they want to maintain that senior access. But most of them are not doing it for the benefit of the country or to follow the instructions of the president or the attorney general. They're doing it first to save their jobs, but others are doing it because they know Trump's only going to be around 3.5 more years. And they will still be there. So it's really important for them to clean house. And it looks like the Attorney General has not given the FBI leadership the instructions to clean house. Now, back to your question, which is better for Dan Bongino and Kash Patel to go or for Pam Bondi to go? I think it's a valuable team, and they have just a strong set of disagreements on this issue, if we're to believe the gossip.
So you think Bondi should stay as well?
Yeah, I'd been critical of her last week, and I retracted that because I thought, she's got a ton on her plate. She's doing a lot of great things, and we tend to look at the things that she's not doing that we want her to do, or the things she's not doing the way we want them to. And I just sat back for a minute and said, no, we've got to look at the big picture. Is she doing what the president wants? Yes. Is a lot of it going to be different from what some of us would like to see? Of course. Is she so distracted that it's not humanly possible to follow all the issues all at once? Like this, imagine way down in the bureaucracy, this director of records management policy, a bureaucrat who's a presidential appointee, but he's still a bureaucrat, not confirmed by the Senate, moved over from the National Archives. It seems like a really harmless position until you look at the power you have. If you're in charge of the policy of maintaining DOJ records, it's an immensely powerful position. But if you're keeping your head down like a good bureaucrat, you're not going to get noticed. So I'm trying to get him noticed. Lawrence Brewer.
But it's taking all of us on the outside to get it done, I've noticed, or I won't say us, but it figures that I know on the outside. And I will tell you what I'm hearing about Pam Bondi in the last week that was a bit disconcerting is that she is putting the thumb on the scale in a certain investigation in a way that is preventing or trying to keep a key witness from sharing information with a relevant agency that would be absolutely vital to an investigation that every person in my audience, I can guarantee you, cares about. And for some reason, the directive is coming directly from Pam Bondi for this guy not to talk. So she's obviously paying attention to certain matters. And in this case, it's detrimental, her attention.
Sure. But then you see the president coming out and saying, everybody should just be quiet. Pam Bondi's doing a great job. Everybody's got to get along, and we've got to move forward. So it's not just the attorney general, is it? It's the president. So she's executing the president's will. So in this case, what we elected the president, and this is what he's doing. We don't have to like it. But if you look at, say, what Dan Bongino is saying repeatedly on X, he's saying, thank you for all your public support, and thank you for your informed criticisms. We pay attention to all of this, and we're working as best we can. So he's literally soliciting tips and advice and even criticisms, and he doesn't have to do that. He doesn't need that. No, almost no other official in the government is doing that, but Bongino is, and that's really vital.
I do want to get back real quick just to put a bow on it all and get back to where we were, because people do care about Epstein no matter what the administration would hope. It's not going anywhere. And it is the idea that he was working for foreign intelligence entities that affect directly our domestic and foreign policy here in the United States, but particularly our foreign policy. And that's what voters care about. I want to play this soundbite of Trump getting angry about someone asking the question about him being an intelligence asset. And then I just want to ask you one question. Let's listen to that soundbite.
Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Costa, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of the step?
Yeah, sure. If I
Could I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
I had just received a backgrounder last week on the potential Russia ties to Ghislaine Maxwell. And you brought it up briefly that you think perhaps it wasn't just Israel, that he was a Russian asset, perhaps, Epstein. Could he have been both? I mean, we know many double agents in history. Was it that he was, by way of Israel, a Russian asset? Because that's the backgrounder I sort of received. I didn't know how much there were some ties between the two countries.
He could have been an asset for any intelligence service. And really, any intelligence service in the world would have been foolish not to exploit that. Now, if he's our asset and he's using it to spy on and compromise American citizens, that would be not just a crime of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but for the people in the FBI or CIA or whoever else that were behind it. My theory is that he was a Russian asset, as was his father-in-law, the late Robert Maxwell, who was a Czechoslovak Ukrainian Jew whose family was wiped out in the Holocaust. He became a British citizen. He fought in World War II with the British forces at Normandy, served well, became a British citizen, changed his name to Robert Maxwell, and but then became quickly in the early 1950s a security concern, meaning they were concerned he was a Soviet asset, and somewhere along the line he had been recruited by or placed himself in the services of Stalin's Soviet Union. What happens with these guys when they're recruited like that is they are recruits for life. And many of them, as they move up, will recruit their children and other relatives and hand them off as groomed assets for the Soviet intelligence services. And my theory is this was the case then. He was part of the British Labour Party on the left. He was very soft on the Soviet Union. He criticized the American effort to fight communism in Southeast Asia. Yet he bought up and took control of Pergamon Brassy, which was the main publisher of academic works on national security and Cold War. It was a center-right publication, but that was very good cover for him, but it also allowed him to own it and to direct publishing policy in a crucial area of study for how do you combat the Soviets. And then a month before the Soviet Union collapses, his dead body is discovered in the Mediterranean after he was sailing solo on his yacht. So he died somehow, whether it was by suicide or somebody murdered him. We just don't know. What we do know is that it's common among intelligence services to exchange information, even if they're adversarial. For example, Putin tipped off the FBI in advance about the Boston Marathon terrorists. They were from Russia originally. Putin's intelligence service picked up information that they were going to commit a terrorist act in the United States. The FBI took the information and didn't do anything about it. So it's not uncommon for adversarial services to be warning one another where it's in a mutual interest or there's something confidence building purpose and so on. So the same thing could have happened for Israel, which is in a situation of having an existential threat, to be trading intelligence with the Soviets. And we know they were doing this under Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir to get Jews out of the Soviet Union. Well, this just so happens that Shamir was prime minister at the time of Maxwell's death in 1991 as the Soviet Union was collapsing. So could it be the Soviets liquidate, knocking off some of their key assets? Could it be the Israelis or other services knocking off somebody who they had had some kind of dealings with? Could it have been a suicide of Maxwell knowing the jig's up, the Soviet Union's collapsing? The fact is we don't know, which is why it's so important to get to the bottom of the Ghislaine Maxwell Epstein case, because obviously some intelligence service would have been in a position to exploit it. Imagine the future kings of England, the future prime ministers of England, the future presidents of the United States, huge corporate CEOs and influencers and publishers and entertainment figures. All of this would have been worth priceless, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of intelligence for whoever was controlling that information.
Thank you so much, Michael Waller. Always good to see you.
Good to see you.
Michigan attorney Stephanie Lambert was set to begin her trial in a Michigan courtroom today in a case where she's accused of tampering with election evidence, basically election interference. She's in trouble in part for, they say, accessing a Dominion voting machine. We have learned in the last hour some breaking news that Stephanie's case, or her trial, has actually been postponed to August. Now, Stephanie's being represented by two great attorneys, both of whom are regular guests on this show. She is being represented by the Kurt Olson. He is a Washington, D.C. attorney that has come on this show many times to talk about the election fraud that occurred in 2020 and beyond, including 2022. He also handled some cases in Arizona that we covered heavily over the last couple of years. In addition to representing others in those cases, Kurt Olson also works very closely with President Donald Trump, which is a ringing endorsement for him as he represents Stephanie Lambert. In addition to that, another Trump close confidant, Peter Tickton, who is the former schoolmate of President Trump, is also now set to represent Stephanie Lambert as well in her Michigan trial. Already, some very important evidence has been brought forward in her case, as noted by Patrick Kolbach on his X, where he explained in detail that the Michigan Bureau of Elections director, one named Jonathan Brader, admitted to violating the law during cross-examination by Kurt Olson in his defense of former Adams Township clerk Stephanie Lambert, Stephanie Scott and her attorney Stephanie Lambert. Now, that was under oath that he admitted to destroying election records. That is against the law. Joining us now to talk more about how important what Brader admitted to under oath is and how relevant it is to Stephanie's case and what it can mean for her in August is Patrick Kolbach himself, joining us from Michigan. First off, I just want to ask you about the timeline now, Patrick. Is it a good thing for Stephanie, who has also been on the show in the past? Is it a good thing for Stephanie that they have postponed her trial date to August?
Yeah, actually, because for the reason, the key reason it's okay to move it back to August is because she wanted to make sure that the jury instructions were going to be made public before the trial started. We all saw what happened with Mike Lindell's trial, frankly, when the jury instructions were designed to actually tilt the battlefield significantly against Mike in his trial. Stephanie's getting out in front of this and saying, I want to see these jury instructions beforehand.
Let's talk about Brader's admission under oath, right? He has admitted to this under oath that he destroyed election records. How and when and what does this mean?
Well, first of all, just for all your listeners here, there's a tale of two Stephanies here. We're talking about Stephanie Scott, who's the former Adams Township clerk out in Hillsdale County, out in Michigan. And she essentially is on trial because she refused to allow Hardin or Civic to come in and wipe her machines like they did out in Mesa County, Colorado with Dominion when they came in to service the machines in that election. And the reason she said no is that she wanted to preserve the integrity of the election records under her jurisdiction, which is her duty as a clerk to go off and do so. So, and there's a lot of parallels between what's happening to clerk Stephanie Scott and what happened to clerk Tina Peters. So that's one of the Stephanies. Now, the other Stephanie, Stephanie Lambert, is one of a handful of attorneys that's willing to go out and go to bat for folks like Stephanie Scott when they're trying to fight the system. And in this case, they just went through preliminary hearing. They're pre-trial technically, but during that pre-trial discussion, we had Kurt Olson, who's a great attorney, one of those handful of attorneys that will tackle the topic of election fraud. And during cross-examination of the Michigan Bureau of Elections Director, Jonathan Brader, and as you said, Jonathan Brader actually admitted to violating federal law, which is Title 52, Section 20701, which requires the preservation of all election records, for a period of not less than 22 months after the election. So, and Jonathan Brader admitted to issuing an unlawful directive during that testimony under cross-examination by Kurt Olson. So that is a big deal, is that this is only one of the latest examples of our election system, our election officials in Michigan, led by Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who's been found in violation of law by 7 different courts who found that she has issued unlawful guidance to clerks. Kudos to Stephanie Scott for saying, hey guys, this lady is consistently issuing unlawful directives. I know what the law says. I know about my duty to preserve the election records. And she stood up. And in response for her standing up, Benson and Jonathan Brader went after her with both barrels with the state of Michigan prosecuting him. And if found guilty, Stephanie Scott could be facing 20 years in prison. This is a big deal. And the fact that it was done on behest of somebody who's issuing unlawful guidance, hopefully that leads to the final dismissal of this case, because it never should have been brought.
Yeah, I hope so. And just for the viewers in our audience who might not be familiar with Stephanie Lambert, she's a well-known name in these our election fraud circles, but perhaps our audience, because her story has not received quite the attention as some of the other cases that we talk about. It's remained kind of more behind the scenes, though it's a case we reference quite often in our circles. Stephanie Lambert was a very successful Detroit prosecutor, right, in her life before getting in and being willing to look at election fraud, and in pointing out that she's a prosecutor. Well, you have to understand, particularly about Detroit, where there's a huge caseload, right? That might be one of the busiest districts in the country. She knows how to build a case. She understands when she's looking at evidence, when there's wrong and that this is violating the law. So she understands investigations. So when she looked at these election crimes that were occurring in 2020, she's like, wow, there's real problems here. And to her, and I've spoken with her, she's been on this show, it seemed like an easy case. Right, but she has, because of that, and I think also one reason she's such a specific target is because it's such a threat to the narrative that these are not, people who know anything. She was a very successful prosecutor, so she knows what she's doing, and that's a huge threat. In talking about the destruction of the records in the state of Colorado, at least, the Trump administration has sent, a letter saying they have to preserve their records. We know that some of the letters that the Trump administration, or some of the records that the Trump administration is requesting they preserve or produce, is long gone. Okay, we know they destroyed a lot of those records in Colorado. Have they, or should they do the same in Michigan? Because I haven't heard that the Trump administration has sent a records preservation letter to the state of Michigan when it comes to election records, and should they?
Well, absolutely, and particularly around 2024 election. I mean, we've got evidence that there's 125,428 illegal votes that were cast in the 2024 election per the Michigan Secretary of State's own record. So absolutely, we need to get that information. I'm going to be testifying before the Michigan House tomorrow. And one of the things I'm going to be asking for is something called the QVF transaction log, which is a qualified voter file, a list of all the modifications to the state's qualified voter file, including voter history data, and that should be made available to everybody. But back to Stephanie Lambert for just a second, because I thank you for highlighting her work on it. She's one of those folks that has been at the center of this election fraud investigation for quite a few years. So it's obvious why the state of Michigan wanted to make an example out of her, because she's facing 15 years in prison for assisting her client, Stephanie Scott, in her efforts to preserve those election records. And they want to make an example out of her. And for those of you who don't know, Stephanie Lambert is also the former attorney, well, actually, I think current attorney of Patrick Byrne as well. And if you remember, there's a lot of Dominion internal emails that were put out on the World Wide Web via Twitter posts from Sheriff Darleaf, also in Michigan, Berry County. He's one of the good guys. Stephanie Lambert came across during her support of Patrick Lambert a series of information that indicated that criminal activities were ongoing. And so she dutifully provided that information to law enforcement. And Sheriff Darleaf was one of the few members of the law enforcement community at the time, this is before Trump got back into office, that was willing to actually look at these emails. And Sheriff Leaf made sure that the public had access to these internal emails. So Stephanie's been at the center there. She knows what's wrong. She knows what's against the law. And she's willing to get that information out to people, even if there are consequences like what's happening to her right now in this trial. So kudos to Stephanie.
And also the part of the story you don't often hear about people is she's a mother. She's a mother to 3 children, one quite young, and she faces serious prison time. So keep her in your prayers. We'll keep following the story. This is some good news. Okay, those are positives. I want to talk about the OG of political persecution. You said this is much like Tina Peters. Well, there is an update in Tina Peters' case. A judge has ruled that she must appear. She cannot appear remotely for her next set of hearings. Correct? She must appear in person. Why is that important?
Well, I mean, I don't know too much about that one, so I'm not going to comment.
Sorry, it literally I just saw this before we came on, so I'm sorry to throw that at you, but I did want to add that in.
Sorry about that, but I mean, anytime Tina gets an opportunity to testify on her own behalf, I mean, I'd love that's great, and to be in person, see the fact that she is a Gold Star mom, and get them a chance to identify with her in the courtroom, I think is important. So anyway, I hope her prison sentence gets commuted ASAP.
ASAP. I've laid out all the reasons why I consider her a federal whistleblower, and I think the Trump administration can bring in the marshals and pick her up today. Obviously, there must be a reason they're not. But I am not a lawyer. I did not sleep in a Holiday Express. I don't play one on TV. I just, as an investigative journalist, it just makes sense to me that there's a case to be made there. And several legal experts who really, that is their job, have said that they agree with me. Patrick Kolbeck, thank you so much for taking us through this. It's a very important lawsuit. A very important criminal case. We'll be keeping our eye on that. Thank you for the latest updates. Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thanks for getting the word out to everybody, because you're on the front lines getting this information out. Not too many people want to talk about this. So kudos to you, Emerald. Thank you.
Unfortunately. It's been 1 full year since the fateful assassination attempt against President Donald Trump at Butler, Pennsylvania campaign rally. In fact, we had a special over the weekend revisiting, honoring, and remember Butler, Pennsylvania with Vanessa Broussard. Now, since that time, many questions have swirled around that awful day, such as how did the suspected shooter manage to penetrate what should have been a secured area and remain undetected in that area for longer than an hour? According to our friends at the Gateway Pundit, their investigation into the matter found that Secret Service knew there was a credible threat against President Donald Trump a full 10 days before the Butler rally. And they never shared those concerns with staff on the ground at Butler. One of the specters at the rally, a fire chief who was attending the rally with his wife and daughters, spectators, Corey Compatori, was tragically killed by the assassin's bullet, as Compatori was in the line of fire. Trump honored Compatori in his acceptance speech last year at the Republican National Convention, yet his widow has been highly critical of the Secret Service in recent weeks. Listen.
I want to sit down with the Secret Service and I want them to tell me everything that happened that day. I want to know why they failed. I want to know what happened. Why Butler? Why was that such a failure that day? What was the reason? Why did he walk around for an hour without someone grabbing him?
All important questions that need to be answered. Yet in a recent Fox News interview with his daughter-in-law, President Trump said this about the Secret Service investigation into the Butler assassination attempt.
So they briefed me numerous times, the FBI, the Secret Service, sort of everybody. DOJ, Pamela's doing I think she's doing a fantastic job. But they briefed me and I'm satisfied with it. They should have had somebody in the building That was a mistake. They should have had communications with the local police. They weren't tied in. And they should have been tied in. So there were mistakes made. And that shouldn't have happened. And that building was a prime building in terms of what they were trying to do. So, but I was satisfied in terms of the bigger plot, the large.
So President Trump says openly in that interview that there was a larger plot afoot at Butler, Pennsylvania, but that he's also satisfied with the findings of the Secret Service investigation. We're now joined by former White House staffer Gabrielle Cuchilla to tell us more about what she is hearing in this matter. And not only were you a White House staffer, and we talked about that a lot in relation to the auto pen because you were in the Office of Presidential Records and you dealt specifically with auto pen and the signings of certain documents. And so we have news on that front as well. But Gabrielle, a lot of people don't know that you actually have been trained in the law enforcement sector,
apparatus,
federal law enforcement, and you know a lot about intelligence and the Secret Service. So I'll leave it at that. What do you make of the latest revelations regarding the investigation into Butler? There has been some firings, but specifically Trump saying there was a larger plot afoot, and there were a full 10 days they had this information.
Yeah, Emerald, I appreciate you having me on. And just to give a little bit more context, I've worked alongside Secret Service at the White House in different capacities, and I spent about 6 years working in a security on a security contract, which involved Secret Service in different capacities, informally and formally. And I can say even about 6 months before this happened over in Butler, Pennsylvania, the Secret Service did ask the CIA for assistance in bolstering their surveillance capabilities. Secret Service is divvied up into a ton of different umbrellas. One of them being, like you have the agent side and you have the uniform division, and of the uniform division, you have your counter sniper element, and there's also your surveillance element, people on foot beat, which tends to be a lot of people that are circulating around the White House. I'm sure you could probably pick them out with their earbuds, but all in all, there was a little bit of misinformation, which I even hate to even say that, but just to clarify, I saw some circulation saying that this was one of the very few times that counter snipers were deployed for a rally. That's not true. They come to the president or a campaign individual during election season, certainly. Of course, a former president, they do have that counter sniper capability. I mentioned that because I can confirm there was a lot of hearsay as to who might have executed that lethal shot to Crooks. I've been told by elements very close to the situation back then last year and up until this point that was the lethal shot was by a counter sniper officer. But I can also say when those counter sniper officers, I want to focus on them a lot because typically when they are deployed for an event, whether it's for a campaign official or whoever, in this case, of course, President Trump being on the campaign trail at that time, usually they take about 1 week of doing in advance. But I will say a lot of the shortcomings, yes, do I think that there's a bigger element to this? Of course I do. Do I think it's very fishy that a lot of information hasn't come out? Yes. Do I think it's weird that the information that was circulating at that time last year, if you remember, there was a ton of imagery with circles that were supposed to be signals intelligence, that there was this phone that was pinging in Butler and then pinging at the FBI office. And, I'm well versed in signals intelligence, so I can tell you that information wasn't real. I do think that information is out there in some capacity. And, since they're saying there's no paper trail, I imagine that there's still an investigation going on exactly on the SIGINT side. But I say all this to say, with all the elements involved, when you look at the counter sniper team, those were the ones that engaged the shooter and had the lethal shot. Those are the ones that are supposed to be out there a week in advance. But those are also the same people that collect on those advance trips out in the open. They make it known that Secret Service is there. They have cameras. They don't do clandestine photography. They even print out the movements, which I know a lot of people wouldn't like this, especially if you have Secret Service members that are watching this. But I know that the Secret Service, when they go on these advance trips, they print off the blueprints of the president's movements and grids of where everybody's going to be positioned, and they do it on open line communication. They can do it at the hotels that they're staying at. They've done it before. So this was twofold. I do believe that there's something more nefarious going on, and has been, and that's why we're not going to get the information. And it's very disheartening that I don't think maybe we ever will, considering, what's happened with all the Epstein talk and, things that we still have on a laundry list of answers that we never got. Especially, Corey Compratori's family still not knowing any details surrounding his death other than a stray bullet. But at the same rate, you're also dealing with this element that everyone thinks Secret Service, they think that's a very sexy name. So they assume that that's the cream of the crop. But I always like to say, when it comes to the government, or even, dare I say, when it's LEO and the intel community in general, there is this comfortability once these people sign on to the job and it becomes they're the cream of the crop, caveat being of those that apply. And I know that sounds really harsh. I'm pro law enforcement. I've worked in these spaces before, and I still care for them. But there is this reckoning that the Secret Service never even had addressed until this moment, because a former president at the time that became the president again almost died, and by the grace of God missed that bullet. On top of that, not even just the counter sniper element, but again, going back to the surveillance element, they asked the CIA for help. There is no world, unfortunately, in the federal government where these entities actually play nice. Everybody wants to have this badge of honor that they are the best of all the others. So the CIA actually laughed at the Secret Service, as they do laugh at the FBI, and a lot will say that the CIA is better than the FBI. Like, there's always that competition going on there. I mean, that's just being quite frank. So they just slapped the Secret Service surveillance element with a slide deck, and we're not involved in any, or interested in involving themselves on any hands-on training. There's a lack of wanting so bad to be the best amongst each other and just being the best on your own. And that's a huge communication failure, with all of this, and that's why there
So
are
what
a
do
lot
you
of
mean they
issues.
slapped him with a slide deck? They just sent him a sort of how to do this slide presentation, figured out on your own?
Yeah, it was. Yep, it was a very watered down, pretty much, if you wanted to even Google, surveillance 101 and just understand very
Wow.
elementary, SOPs and tactics of surveillance. It wasn't anything privy or something that they could actually utilize. In the group that they contacted, I won't say specifically, but the group that the Secret Service had contacted was actually the group that traditionally has traveled with the president since like the 80s, and always securing the perimeter for a sitting president. So very well versed, very smart team of surveillance officers. And it wasn't up until recently that they got kind of pulled off that requirement. I believe it was during Bush or Obama. I think it was closer. I think it was Obama. That group ceased to continue that. And so Secret Service had taken it on, and clearly they need some help because this was a very obvious target. And again, with those assessments from the counter sniper team, with those grids that they put degrees on, okay, who's going to be positioned where at what time and whose area of responsibility is what. Obviously, of course, that shed was definitely in the realm of responsibility, no doubt about it. Then you tie in the fact what you were to say, maybe there wasn't enough people, enough officers. I beg to differ. But then you also have the other element, like I just mentioned earlier, coming into play, is that these entities don't like to work with each other, even down sometimes to the state level. So even the communication apparatus, and that's a whole other separate issue, the covert communications, but there was the command center
FBI is
has to
investigating the
exist.
FBI, and they don't even know it. So they don't even
Yeah.
communicate with each other. That's a whole other thing. Real quick before we run out of time, because we have 1 minute in this segment, and then we're going to go deeper into some of the swamp issues with Garrett Ziegler. On the AutoPen story, which you were ahead of everyone, Biden just himself stated that stated explicitly, Gabby, that the AutoPen was utilized for clemencies. What does that mean?
that means that he perjured himself 110% because under the Constitution, that does not, pardons cannot be executed, clemencies cannot be executed with the auto pen. That is a known, it's in fine print in writing. So for him to actually say that and put that on record is heinous. And it reminded me, actually, remember last time we had talked and Neera Tanden said, I don't know who told me, I don't know who told me. And then this New York Times article is saying who told her, Jeff Zients was the one of the people, being the chief of staff, saying, yes, I authorize the auto pen to be utilized for these pardons / clemencies. Well, that he was in office the same time that Neera Tanden was, and then certainly through the duration of Stephanie Feldman. So those two have to answer. Well, actually, all three have to answer to all of that. So the ultimate part is this is clear guilt. The bigger question is whether or not the government actually does something about it. So this kind of just bolsters the reporting in and of itself. And I know that GOP oversight, New York Times had said that GOP oversight with their investigation was looking at the archives. We've talked about this before. I mentioned that because all of the evidence is right there on the White House servers, and for those emails for those that maintain between each administration. So it's all right there. Confirmation.
We'll break down the legal implications of this later in the week with an attorney who's well versed in that. Thank you so much, Gabrielle Cuchillo, for
Absolutely.
the important insight and reporting. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my disapproval of Joe Biden's decision to issue a blanket pardon for his son, Hunter Biden. During the time covered by the pardon, Hunter was working for entities controlled by foreign governments without registering as a foreign agent. According to the House Oversight Committee, $20 million in cash and diamonds was paid to Biden LLCs by entities controlled by China, Russia, Romania, and Ukraine, yet there were no Foreign Agents Registrations Act charges. Now, Biden issued his son a blanket pardon covering a decade of illicit activity. Hunter's crimes were published in the Marco Polo Report. This report can be found at bidenreport.com. The American people deserve to know the truth. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter additional materials into the record.
That speech was made from the House floor, the United States House of Representatives, last December. Now, it's hard to believe that was just 7 months ago. A lot has happened. Yet it remains relevant today because the crimes of the Biden syndicate remain unresolved, and important questions, as we were just talking about with Gabrielle Cuchillo about their corruption, remain unanswered. Now, to keep us from forgetting, our friends at Marco Polo are relaunching their searchable database of all the emails from Hunter Biden's laptop from hell. We've known about the contents of these Hunter Biden laptops since 2020. House GOP, led by Representatives James Comer, has been pursuing various threads into the sordid, complex web of the Biden syndicate's corruption. Despite all this, though, House GOP continues to remain flat-footed when it comes to, getting any real answers or accountability or criminal convictions, for that matter. It's all just seems to us like a dog and pony show the longer it goes on. Let's see how Gary Ziegler feels. He joins us now. He's the man behind Marco Polo, who's been doggedly pursuing the Biden crime syndicate for years and, quite frankly, doing the job that Congress should be doing. But we're glad you're filling in the gap. And why make the database searchable again now, Garrett?
Well, thank you for having me on. There's a couple different threads there. I did not know that Gabrielle was going to mention the name Jeffrey Zients, but we posted about him last night on our X page, and he is precisely the kind of person that we profile in our book and in our database. There are people whose names the public doesn't even know well that helped run the country. So our motives for this are myriad. Number one, when we published and launched this first version in May of 2022 with 128,000 emails, it was done very quickly, and the database wasn't even mobile configured, meaning it was best viewed on a desktop. Now we have a more professional development behind it, and it's going to be up there till the end of time. So our motive for putting it out is because the public has had no real transparency in some of the other biggest scandals. Everybody's talking about Epstein. That is apparent. It's been a total and unmitigated disaster for going on a week now since the Axios leak of the memo. But Anthony Weiner, zero primary source materials. We can't even get some of the warrants that the feds and the SDNY asked for Anthony Weiner. The some of the underlying primary source materials for other scandals, not just Epstein, but people who went to the island. All of these things are being hidden through either statutes. I've heard nobody talk about the Privacy Act of 1974 and why that needs to be looked into, meaning repealed or rescinded, because what that does is it's not just, it sounds great, right? Every bill that Congress passed sounds great. The words do. But the Privacy Act is being used by highfalutin people to say the government can't release anything, or else I'm going to sue for damages, meaning your name has to be redacted from any document, even though the document may not accuse you of a particular crime. That was one of the lies that was in the press release from the DOJ and the FBI. By the way, another thing that people don't realize is the FBI DOJ press release said that civil liberties experts got to go through all of the Epstein material. Well, Emerald, I don't know about you, but I'd like to know who these civil liberties experts were. Were they NGOs? If so, what were Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi, and everybody's criteria for selecting so-called civil liberties experts? So this has been an embarrassment. I'll say that. I think it's the first real failure of the second Trump term. I think the bombing of the Iranian nuclear sites went a lot better than what my mother and other right-wing people, and myself included, were worried that it was going to be. It was there were no people over there, thank goodness. So I think this Epstein debacle is the first real failure. The president doesn't know how important it is to his base. He hasn't learned that yet. He will. But these failures that I'm articulating are the exact reason why we're putting this more professionalized, mobile-friendly email database up. Emerald, 128,000
I love that it's mobile friendly.
Mobile friendly. We're going to create an app eventually. It was just we're just polishing it. That's what we're doing. It was off. It was down for 6 months. We rebooted the entire thing. New server. It's going to be on the Rumble cloud. I know that you guys are on the front page of the Rumble Live thing today. We're trying to use an all right ecosystem for this thing, and hopefully it drives a lot of traffic to our site, and it helps us pay down the $110,000 in legal bills we have. Not me. This isn't going to me. It'd be to the nonprofit. So we are the only group. The last thing I'll say about the email database before I want to talk about Zinst, because we posted about him yesterday. And if your producers can put there's like a whole page of Jeffrey Zinst results in our Biden laptop emails database. So if
We
somebody
have
didn't know
3
who this guy
minutes, so I'm
was-
going to let you take it out with Zions. I want you to do that because we only have 3 minutes left. So let's go.
Some Weinstein, there are a lot of Weinsteins on X. Some Weinstein last fall said around September, provide for me, and he meant this, I'll take him at his word that he meant it seriously and not, just tongue in cheek. Provide to me the surname of the person running the U.S. executive branch. He asked this. And a lot of people were just, playing back on Twitter and responding with funny stuff. And I'm so German that I just didn't, I actually responded with a legitimate surname that I think fit the question. I was very serious. And sure enough, I found this great pic through facial recognition of Zinz and Hussein in the Oval. This is back during Hussein's term. And I said, this is one of the guys. I didn't say all. I didn't say he was the only guy. I didn't say this was the only last name of the person running the auto pen in the actual executive branch while Joe was fed and put to bed by 8 p.m. every night and wiped. But this is one of them. This is one of the half dozen people that actually was responsible. The New York Times limited hangout piece last night that dropped, it said that Zinz hit reply all. I authorized the use of the auto pen. I don't know what country Jeff Zinz thinks he's in, but the executive powers rested in the president. So the president is the one who authorizes the use of the auto pen, assuming that it's legal for things like pardons. Now, I'm a unitary executive guy, so I think the president can pardon people even verbally, because I love the
Mhm.
separation of powers, and I don't like the Congress encroaching on the president's powers. Legitimate powers. I don't like the courts. So I think the president can pardon somebody by verbal direction or by sending reply all. But I don't know who Jeff Zients thinks he is, that he can do that. I mean,
Oh,
that
obviously
limited
thinks
hangout.
he's president.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So
we have-
Weinstein asked, what's the last name of the person? We're telling you who it is, and I urge everybody with access to BidenLaptopEmails.com, with access to our book, which you can go read for free at BidenReport.com. Go look up these
Let's
these
go
names.
get. We'll have our audience do some homework on him. We'll have you back, and we'll go through it in a longer segment. Everything we discussed today reinforces the point I've made over and over that President Trump needs to set up an office of political warfare. He needs to staff it with real pros. His advisors keep picking clowns for the National Security Council, the DOJ, because they want to control Trump and not serve him. That's how you end up in World War III with third-string Fox News host leading you. That's the absolute truth. Remember to go to mypillow.com, use your promo code TRUTH. I will see you here tomorrow at noon and 8 p.m., and that's the absolute truth.